the fact of the matter, when you look at it, it doesn't seem to me, based on the laws of armed conflict, based on what I've been reading about the difference between a disabled boat and a destroyed boat, it doesn't seem to fit that bill of a war crime. I do want to know, and I think almost every Republican has said this needs to be investigated, and we need to make sure that everything was done correctly.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Suspension of the Rules podcast, where it's just optional to show up now. Both my co-hosts are absent today. Camille, good excuse. Ari, good excuse. Family stuff, dog stuff. Thankfully, we had a guest planned for the show today, so you don't have to just listen to me. I'm not here by myself. I am joined by Lydia Moynihan, a columnist at the New York Post, who has been all over. I mean, I can't turn on my TV without seeing her anymore, which is awesome.
I'm so sorry.
Because
That's terrifying.
No, I'm a fan. I'm a fan. Lydia, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you joining us on short notice.
Of course. I'm glad that you're not like, oh, this bitch, turn the channel.
No.
Based on the Twitter comment, I think some people do feel that way. So
I will say, I brought you here today because I have beef, but we're going to get into it. I disagree with one of your takes, and my favorite thing to do is to have these conversations with people when I'm on the other side of stuff. So I want to get into that. We're going to talk Venezuela boat strikes, where you and I are on opposite sides of this one.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a chance to make your case, because last week I went off, and Ari and Camille, who are my co-hosts on the show, they were basically on my side. Oftentimes, the three of us disagree a lot. That's what Tangle's all about. That's why we're here. But we were just like a line last week. And then I saw your clip on this. I'll tell you a funny story, actually. I was going to quote tweet something you had tweeted, because we follow each other on Twitter. Like I said, I'm a fan of your stuff. I was going to quote tweet something you tweeted and like criticize it. And then I was like, this is such like a media asshole thing to do. Just like tell her to come on the show and talk about it. And then I DM'd you and you were like immediately game. So I am stoked to have you here. But I always do, before we jump in with our guests, the first thing I always do is I'd love to just hear a little bit about your background, like how you got into media. Give us the Lydia Moynihan story on how you ended up in the New York Post and all over CNN and Fox News and doing all these awesome TV hits I see you doing.
The spiel. Well, I've always wanted to be omniscient, so I'm on my quest to do just that. No, I'm actually from Washington State, just outside Portland, Oregon, of all places. You don't meet a lot of people on the East Coast from that region. Anyway, beautiful place to grow up. I actually was homeschooled, and then I went to a very tiny Christian college in Manhattan that has since closed. But once you come to New York, it's kind of addicting. And you sort of forget that you're living in like a 6th floor walk up and you have to take your laundry across the street. And it's just an exciting place to be. So once you're here, you're like, wait, I have to stay here. And I interned at CNBC, which was just very cool. I think coming from the West Coast, where everyone I knew had jobs that were very conventional, like engineer, doctor. It was cool to see people like in news, and they were getting to, as an intern, I got to like go to a courthouse and see a trial, and it just seemed so exciting. And then again, it's like New York. Once you get in it, it's kind of addicting. And then I got a job at Fox Business working with Charlie Gasparino. We had a lot of fun. He had me do some of his dirty work. I'd have to call everyone, and they would scream at me instead of him. And then I've been at the Post for 4 years. I have a column now. I write a lot about the intersection of business and politics. I do a lot of interviews. But it's fun. I mean, it's a good time to be in media. There's never been so much to cover before.
Yeah, there's never been so much to cover, and there's opportunity everywhere, it seems like. Charlie, that sounds like an awesome job to have. I respect him so much. He's like one of the few people I feel like who's left in the media world who's just like not scared of anybody.
Does not give a fuck.
He just does not give a fuck. He just like, he will piss off anybody, fire shots at his own side. I'm a huge fan of his stuff. So
he's an honest broker. You're never worried that he's trying to like protect someone or spin something a certain way.
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but that's the read I have on him from watching him from afar. All right, so I want to jump into it. We're going to talk about some of the stuff going on in Trump world. I think, you write a lot about the economy and stuff. I want to talk about that. The thing that's in the news right now that we're getting bombarded with is the Venezuela boat strike.
Literally and figuratively, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite a word choice.
I saw you make a point. I think it was on CNN, maybe with Abby Phillips. You were saying, basically criticizing the outsized amount of coverage this story has gotten, given, the Obama drone strike, stuff that happened in the past that was just kind of like ended up being a blip on the radar. But I think it was, I was struck personally that I felt like I was getting from you basically an outright defense of some of these strikes. I spent last week on the show kind of hammering the Trump administration for this. I think probably saying stuff that you might categorize as like run-of-the-mill sort of mainstream center left commentary, which was just like, this seems like it's illegal. This seems like it's a war crime. We don't know who these people are. And I've been really upset about it. So I wanted to bring you on to hear you make the case for our audience, because like the mission here is viewpoint diversity, expose people to different arguments. And last week on this show, people did not get an argument in favor of these boat strikes, candidly. So I'm curious, like, give me your view on what's happening these last few weeks, kind of what you're seeing. Make the case to our audience like you've been making it. I've seen you on CNN, Fox News and stuff making this case. I'm curious to hear that, and then I want to talk to you about it a little bit.
So one criticism I have is just the amount of attention that this is getting. I want to touch on that. And then I do also want to address the allegations that this is a war crime, because obviously the first point about the outsized coverage is getting doesn't actually address whether or not this was a good or a right thing. And both of those are important issues to address. So one, I do get frustrated that the media has just wall-to-wall coverage of this. And I think this is part of a bigger trend that we see from the mainstream media, is they're so quick to sort of lose the forest for the trees and always take the side of whoever it is that they deem to be the victim or the oppressed. And so we've seen this with ICE raids time and time again, and I feel that they often lose the forest from the trees, right? They focus just on anybody who they think DHS has victimized. And instead of acknowledging that actually people's lives have been destroyed by unvetted illegal immigrants, they leave that out, and then they just focus on, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We heard that nonstop. So I feel like there's these talking points that really just, I don't know, kind of obfuscate what's actually going on. So I think that's my frustration with the way this has been covered and the amount of coverage that it's gotten. And I think it is important to note, and look, there are some people who are consistent where they've always been opposed to drone strikes, but I would say I have noticed that this has gotten way more attention than any drone strike from Obama or Biden. Obama drone striked American civilians and, drone striked a wedding. He dropped something like 16,000 bombs on Syria. Biden, a similar incident, he drone strikes civilians. So those things have happened a lot, and that's not a justification of drone strikes in general, but it's an observation that the media only seems to care about it when it's Trump. They didn't seem that concerned when it was Biden or Obama. So I think it's sort of selective outrage. But to your second point about whether or not this is a war crime, I think what feels really frustrating is one report can create an entire news cycle that consumes the entire dialogue, the entire conversation, and people don't actually take a step back to offer the other side or to say, the question is, we don't know. We don't have all the answers yet. And so you saw all of these lawmakers who thought, this is a great opportunity for me to slam the administration and Pete Hegseth. So almost every Democratic 2028 hopeful was making the rounds this weekend saying, if this Washington Post report is true, Pete Hegseth is a war criminal. And what the Washington Post report alleged, and this does get a little into the weeds, is they basically alleged that this was a violation of the laws of armed conflict. So if you are fighting an enemy combatant, if you have a strike, and let's say the boat had been completely destroyed and there were helpless people in the water, they were victims, they were surrendering, it would be a war crime to have a second shot that killed them. That would be a war crime. So that was what the Washington Post story alleged. what we're learning now and what the New York Times has reported and what the White House is saying is that actually they weren't victims and trying to surrender. They were actually calling for reinforcement and wanting to complete this mission of delivering drugs and continue with what exactly they were doing. So in that case, it's actually not a war crime. So I think it's frustrating that this is a very nuanced and challenging dialogue, and people don't take the time to look into that. They just are quick to jump on the bandwagon of, I hate Donald Trump, I hate Pete Hegseth, so I'm going to go after them. And the fact of the matter, when you look at it, it doesn't seem to me, based on the laws of armed conflict, based on what I've been reading about the difference between a disabled boat and a destroyed boat, it doesn't seem to fit that bill of a war crime. I do want to know, and I think almost every Republican has said this needs to be investigated and we need to make sure that everything was done correctly. And I've yet to hear from any Republican that they don't want to look more into this. I think there's absolutely, need to make sure that everything was done properly and that it should be investigated to make sure that, again, we want to do things as correctly as possible. And we're doing that. So I think it's that's my take. And again, I just feel frustrated that the media always seems to take the side of the victim, whoever that is, even if they're a narco-terrorist.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay. First of all, I'm glad you brought up
talk too for like a long time.
No, no. I mean, that's why you're here. I want to actually hear the case and have it out a little bit. And I'm glad I did, because I think I see, first of all, some lines of agreement for sure. I mean, number one, I think the media criticism element of it, I subscribe to. I mean, my position might be a little different. I might say it a little differently, which is like, I wish the media had covered the Obama drone strikes with the same tenacity that they're covering this. I mean, to me, the solution isn't that like this isn't as big of a deal. It's that like, we should have been dogs about this when it was Obama or Biden in office, not just when it's Trump. This is something I've said, I've tried to put this argument out into the world. It hasn't gotten much traction, to be totally honest. But my take is, my take has always just been the treatment of Trump is only unfair because the press doesn't treat other, Obama types the same way. When in reality, I think the tenacity the press has with Trump is the tenacity the press should have with every president. And if that were the case, then Trump wouldn't have the sort of like media bias claims that he has. I mean, I think it's fair when he makes them, because I do think he gets treated differently. I think part of it is that he's an extraordinary president in a lot of ways, some good, some bad. But like, I don't think the tenacity was ever the same with Obama. So I'll see that point. I guess like underlying it for me is, I mean, the war crime question. We talked about this last week before the New York Times post. I didn't have the benefit of the New York Times report, and the ABC News report came out, which to your point, there's now this question being surfaced, which is, what if these guys were trying to get back on the boat and were calling for reinforcements, which is now, it's what the defense coming out of the Department of Defense is, and there are sources leaking this to the New York Times and ABC, and they're reporting it. I'm stuck on the question of, are we at war with drug smugglers? I mean, to me, there is no war with Venezuela. So like doing this in the first place, like this conversation only works if you're ceding the administration's point out of the get-go that these are enemy combatants, so we can treat them like they're enemy combatants, which like, I don't buy that. So I think like I struggle to even get sort of to first base on the question. It's just like, I don't think we're at war with Venezuela. I don't think we're at war with these drug runners, despite the narco-terrorist designation. But I think like the second part of it is, it just has the extra-judicial killing feel. Like, we have one instance where there's been survivors, and at least one of those survivors now was repatriated to his country, who came out and said the guy was a fisherman. He wasn't even Venezuelan, by the way. He was Ecuadorian. They're like, this guy's a fisherman. He's not guilty. We're not going to charge him with anything. There's, these Colombian guys who died in one of these strikes, again, not Venezuelan, whose family is now filing like a human rights violation saying that they were fishermen. nowhere in the United States is there a death penalty for smuggling drugs, yet we're saying it's okay to kill people before they're even put on trial for the crime of smuggling drugs if they're in the Caribbean waterways. Like, then it's okay. I mean, I think this is the thing that I struggle with. And I guess I'm curious if you could respond to that. Like that, I'm just like, we're killing these people who we don't have proof. I mean, the administration has not brought forward proof that they are who they say they are. You can see in some of the clips, there appears to me, my untrained eye, to be, big white looking boxes that I suppose could be drugs that are on the boat. But we don't really have proof. We have one instance of survivors where at least one of them who was repatriated to his country, they came out and said he wasn't what the administration says. And then we have another family now going to this human rights org saying that their father or whatever was innocent and trying to file some sort of claim. And many of the survivors have not even been Venezuelan while the administration's telling us they're killing these Venezuelan drug runners. It's just like the whole thing stinks to me. So I'm curious like how you respond to that framing or reframing of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been numerous reports over the years of fishermen who decide they want to be drug runners. CNN actually had like a lengthy hour-long interview and lengthy report with one gentleman who was not Venezuelan, but realized, why am I fishing for fish when I could be making hundreds of thousands of dollars running drugs? So just because somebody's a fisherman doesn't mean that they're also not doing that. I think the boats don't look like fishing boats. They absolutely look like drug boats. And as to your question about whether or not we should be able to bomb people who we view as problematic or a threat to the U.S., I think there is a longstanding precedent for presidents having this kind of authority. Obviously, mostly it's been in the Middle East that we've seen this. And I think we have, again, and to your point, maybe we should have been more critical and this was happening with Obama or Biden, but I think the last person to really like declare war and get congressional input, I mean, I think that was, I want to say FDR. I'm blanking on this now, but it was decades and decades ago. So we have in America just sort of given the president this sort of freedom and this authority to take these kinds of actions. So I think in that regard, I agree with that. I also agree that, again, because of the precedent where we were in war with the Middle East, where we were dealing with terrorists there, how much more so is it a problem that these sort of crimes are happening in our own hemisphere? I think we should absolutely be much more attuned to what's happening in our own backyard. And the Trump administration has said they view this really ultimately not as a foreign policy issue, but as a national security issue. And so I do resonate with that as well. I know one criticism has been that, fentanyl is largely coming from Mexico. But
and
cocaine
China.
and lots of other drugs are also coming from Venezuela. And we also know that during the pandemic, Venezuela, a number of groups were stockpiling fentanyl and cocaine. So there is some intelligence that would suggest there is more fentanyl now potentially coming from Venezuela. So look, yeah, I understand maybe quibbling with this idea of whether or not they should be labeled narco-terrorists. I think they are. And there was another FBI report that came out earlier this year basically talking about Maduro trying to send gangs here, sow chaos in the U.S. So I think it's an important place for the U.S. to be focused. And I also think it's important as well. This is sort of a proxy war in my mind as well, because China has given so much support to Venezuela, given them arms. So I think to an extent, China and Russia and other geopolitical enemies are paying attention to the way that we are operating and what we're allowing in this hemisphere.
All right. So last question on this, and then I want to move on to some of the Trump economy stuff. I guess maybe if I seeded all this, we're at war with Venezuela.
No, but look, there are so many different, and you're doing a great job of highlighting, there's so many different points of agreement or disagreement because there are so many things going on all at once. But sorry, carry on.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I think it's true. I mean, like it's hard because I'm in the mode where I'm on the other side of the issue. So, when I hear you say we give this authority in the Middle East. My initial thought is like, yeah, but in the Middle East, we were killing alleged terrorists who were, literal terrorists who were killing people, suicide bombers, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, like groups that were committing heinous crimes of murder, et cetera. And here we're killing people accused of the crime of smuggling drugs. Now, I don't want to downplay that because, look, I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I talk about this a lot on the show. I talked about it when the first drone strike happened, actually. I look back at my writing in September and cringed a little bit because what I said when the first strikes what happened, I was like, my initial instinct was like, hell yeah, fuck them. I have 20 kids from my high school class who have overdosed and died since I graduated. Ugh. Like my town was crushed by the opioid epidemic, and I want to see heads roll for that. And if so there was this emotional part of me where like I get it, and I'm like, hell yeah, Trump's making them pay. Nobody holds these guys accountable, whatever. And then when I sort of settle my emotions a little bit, I'm like, I don't support the capital punishment for people selling drugs in America. Like emotionally great, but actually push comes to shove, that's not something I would ever support. And I guess I'm just like, I don't know how to bridge that gap where it's like, even if I cede all of these points, we get all the way to like, we're at war with Venezuela, they're narco-terrorists, they're enemy combatants, it's not a war crime, they're calling the guys for backup, whatever, like let all that go. It's just like, should we be killing people for the crime of smuggling drugs when like in our country, that is not something that we ever execute somebody for? And like, I just can't get there. And I don't know how to like how you can defend that when we're doing it just because they're foreigners in, international waters. To me, it's like that doesn't raise the level of the crime, I guess, to that point, even without getting into the fact that these are all alleged drug smugglers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it is an important point. I think the way that you conceded that it was justified that we were targeting terrorists in the Middle East, I think that's what I would say about what's happening in our own hemisphere. I think there is a lot of evidence that especially in Trento Agua, all of these gangs are heavily involved with this. I think they perform similar, disgusting, horrible, violent acts. So I would say to me, it's really the same logic that we used in the Middle East with terrorists. And I think in some ways it's more relevant because these are people who are impacting our lives much more than anybody in Syria or Iran is. I think it has a much more immediate impact. And I hope this is a short-term thing. I think yesterday in the cabinet meeting, Trump said drugs coming in the seas have been reduced like by 91%. So I hope that this is something that provides deterrence and doesn't have to be enacted over the long term. I do think it's draconian. I'm not trying to be flip at all about saying that this isn't a big deal or whatnot, but I don't think that it is a misuse of force when you consider, we went to war in the Middle East because 3,000 people died. The Middle East is a whole different story. There was so much going on, but we went to war in the Middle East essentially because of the 9/11 terrorist attacks that killed 3,000 people. And we ended up killing 4+ million people as a result. And then you look at the number of people who've died as a result of drugs, gangs, all of that. You're talking about millions. And in response, we've killed just 80 people. So I think in warfare, we think about this concept of proportionality a lot. And that's one thing that I've been thinking of. How did we justify killing millions of people when just 3,000 were killed on 9/11? And that's a question that I'm still grappling with. But to me, I look at the proportionality of the impact of drugs and narco-terrorism in the US. And I think the result of what we're doing now is pretty proportional, especially when you consider the history of warfare. You look at the number of people who killed in World War II, any of these wars, there's way more civilians that have been killed. And people seem to accept that that's a reality of warfare. So I would say, again, it's never pleasant or happy that this is a reality, but I think this is a very proportional fight that is being had.
All right. I promise last question. I have many more thoughts, but I do want to cover some other stuff before you get out of here, because I know your time's a little bit limited. I want to talk about the last, I guess we say the last month of elections and sort of the state of Republican Party Trump politics right now. It's been a wild ride. Obviously, we just had the Marjorie Taylor Greene resignation.
Oh my God, I know. That feels like 2 years ago.
I know. Like MAGA infighting. We had some elections in November that went pretty well for Democrats, I think. And then, now everybody after this Tennessee election yesterday, there's sort of a lot of positioning, Trump sort of celebrating, Democrats saying they did so well. One of the issues that you write a lot about is the economy. I think all of a sudden, everybody, Democrats and Republicans, are realizing that the affordability question is like the number one motivator for voters right now. Republicans were keyed in on this in 2024. I think it's a big reason why Trump won, and a big reason, more importantly, why the Biden-Harris ticket lost, because they were trying to tell people that inflation wasn't that bad when it was really bad. And now it seems like Trump is, to me, from where I'm sitting, barreling a little bit towards making a similar mistake that Biden made, where I think he's downplaying some of the affordability issues that people are feeling. It's Trumpian, but he's like saying the affordability stuff is a hoax and
the scam.
Scam. Things are getting better. So I'm curious. Like I'm reading Politico in the morning, like many journalists do. And they're reporting that all these Democratic strategists are like licking their chops because Trump is now doing the same thing Biden did. He's denying that there's like an affordability problem. I'm wondering if you could give me your read on both how the Trump administration is navigating the issue on the politics side and where we are economically. I mean, whether things are actually getting better under Trump or not, because it seems like at least the American sentiment is not improving much. And he's kind of doubling down on this idea that things are getting better. Democrats feel like this is an advantage for them. What's your read on this question where we're at right now?
I mean, it's interesting to see now Democrats are essentially turning to socialism as an alternative to capitalism amid this sort of affordability debate. One general point is it's always so much harder to be the incumbent if people are not happy with the economy. And, months before November 2024, a lot of smart people, pollsters were saying a president has never won when sentiment about the economy is this bad. The incumbent has never won when the sentiment about the economy is this bad. And it was obviously much easier for Trump then to say Bidenomics is a fail. One thing that is really tricky is I do think the economy is doing much better now than it was under Biden. But the reality is that inflation has gone up so much since COVID because Biden in particular passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which of course poured trillions of dollars into the economy. Prices went up. And unless we have deflation, which would be very painful and very bad for the economy, prices aren't actually going to come down. That is just a hard reality. And I think that is a message that Republicans are going to have to acknowledge, because I really don't think there's any world in which prices come down. I think we can always keep them close year over year to where they were last year. But inflation, and even the Federal Reserve, which is in charge of monetary policy and inflation, their target is 2% inflation. So that means that prices are basically going up every year, at least 2%. So that is one super tough reality. And I think ignoring that isn't going to win over anyone. I do think there are things that Trump is doing in terms of deregulation, in terms of energy, that it is very positive. I think he can point to that. I think he can point to other measures that he's taking. Home building is up. There are positive signs, but I think Republicans need to be brutally honest about the fact that prices are not, in almost any universe, going to be coming down. It's interesting, though, seeing this sort of move from the left embrace socialism. And that is really concerning to me because obviously it's easy to message free, free, free. It's easy for Zohran Mamdani to sell this idea that, oh, I just want the government to take care of you. Don't worry about anything. And I don't know how Republicans combat that, because obviously if there's a third grader who's running with the platform of free ice cream in middle school, like they're probably going to win because all the kids want free ice cream. So I think Republicans need to be honest about where we are and point to the fact that Republican policies do actually work in the long run and socialist policies don't work in the long run. And I think, again, there's certain things they can point to already, like gas prices. But I think denying somebody's reality and how they're feeling about the economy is not the right way to approach this.
Do you think the socialism embrace is real? I mean, Mamdani, to me, feels more like an exception, I guess, than the rule. I mean, how would you describe the sort of state of the Democratic Party in that sense? Because it seems to me like he's an outlier less than he is defining the party's path forward, I guess.
I disagree. I think Democrats have this sort of sensibility where they always embrace the most radical thing. Republicans by nature are much more conservative. They're much more averse to change. Whereas Democrats, I think, are inherently more radical. They are kind of excited for the next thing that pushes the envelope. And somebody like Zohran Mamdani is certainly doing that. And it seems like the energy of the party is with Zohran Mamdani and AOC. And you look at Hakeem Jeffries and Kathy Hochul, those sort of conventional Democrats had to certainly bow the knee, essentially, to Zohran and endorse him. And they want to be associated with this super far left flank of the party, right? Otherwise, Kathy Hochul never would have endorsed Mamdani. So I at least see in those instances that conventional Democrats want to be associated with this radical agenda because they think it's popular. And if you look at the polling, I mean, I think people under the age of 30, 60% have a favorable view of socialism. So I think if they're looking at the polling, they're like, oh, this is a winning message. I should jump on this bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, it does, I feel like there's been a lot of interesting writing and thinking about this, even out of the MAGA Trump world. I mean, Peter Thiel, I think, wrote a really great, interesting piece about just sort of why socialism is appealing to the next generation and how conservatives need to have a response to it, because it's a very real thing, that the kind of capitalist failure of this generation. I have no idea where it goes. I mean, I've been joking that, I wouldn't have voted for Mamdani, but I'm excited to see the experiment now that I live in Philadelphia. I'm happy to watch it from afar. And if he can pull off if he gets free childcare pulled off, I'll be sure to move back and enjoy that and, soak up the riches of that in New York City. But I'm skeptical, I'll put it that way. But yeah, it's a wild time. Well, yeah, Lydia, I know you're busy.
This has been tried before. We kind of know where it lands. But isn't that the definition of insanity, trying things again and again and hoping for something different?
My perspective on Mamdani is I don't view him as some big evil. It's the guys pushing for free grocery store, government-run grocery stores and free buses and free childcare. I don't think these are insidious, awful, unethical things to do. I just think there's no way he's going to make it happen, and he won't get anything done with Kathy Hochul as governor, and there's going to be this big push and pull, and the stuff he's going to pilot will probably fail. And that's sort of, I'm less threatened by it than I am I just don't really feel like it's going to work. But, who knows? I mean, maybe it'll be a chaotic 4 years or whatever, and we'll be sitting here talking about how we underestimated the threat 4 years from now. I've been wrong like that before, but I'm just I'm not quite as alarmed as I am sort of bemused by the whole thing, I guess.
Well, you're also an outside observer, so.
That's true. Yeah, it's not my tax dollars, so I'm okay for right now. Lydia Moynihan, thank you for joining us. I know you've got to run. Before you get out of here, if people want to keep up with your work, where's the best place they can do that?
I am too online on Twitter. That's my one place where I post the clips. LJ Moynihan.
All right. I love it. Lydia, thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. And if you want some more, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel And you can also go listen to our podcast, Suspension of the Rules, by finding the Tangle News podcast feed. Just look up Tangle anywhere you listen to podcasts or go to our website, readtangle.com. All right, thanks. Peace.